Over the weekend, the president got bored and decided to see if he could make Democrats defend the most dangerous, corrupt place in the country. And of course he could. It wasn't hard. He just sent a flurry of tweets criticizing the city of Baltimore and the congressman who represents it, Elijah Cummings. The president called Baltimore, quote, a disgusting rat and rodent-infested hellhole, a corrupt mess that no human being would want to live in. A lot of people who've never been to Baltimore claim to be deeply offended by those remarks. But one person who seemed to agree with them was the former mayor of Baltimore, Catherine Pugh. She'd said something remarkably similar just last year.
About a year ago, city leaders identified some of the city's most violent neighborhoods.
What the hell? We should just take all this down.
To target.
Ooh, you can smell the rats.
Under Baltimore's Violence Reduction Initiative.
Ooh, Jesus.
Just last week, we went with Mayor Pugh as she toured an East Baltimore neighborhood.
Oh my God, you can smell the dead animals.
Then came this weekend when Orange Mussolini weighed in on the subject, and suddenly Baltimore became holy ground, a sacred city of light that only an infidel would disparage. An infidel, or perhaps, and this will not surprise you, a racist. Because honestly, only a hardened bigot would criticize a place as awesome as Baltimore. That was the media consensus over the weekend. Watch.
This weekend, racist messages raging from the president's Twitter feed.
Donald Trump masterfully makes it a racist debate about Baltimore.
Another racist attack on an African-American member of Congress and the city he represents.
Well, the president is, as he usually is, or often is, disgusting and racist.
He uses a racist appeal. He uses a bait and switch.
In the most bigoted and racist way.
A racist president who attacks people because they are African Americans.
He says he's not a racist, but the racists believe he's a racist.
How to respond when a president says racist things.
A racist who makes ever more outrageous racist remarks.
Donald Trump is a bigot and a racist. This isn't even subjective.
Donald Trump and his people think white people are so racist that the way to get them to vote is to be racist.
This is just who Donald Trump is. He's just an old racist.
The whole thing is a campaign tactic dreamed up at the DNC. Once the Russia conspiracy imploded, Democrats and their lackeys in the media moved on to the only other message they have, which is, shut up, racist! Meanwhile, Baltimore, the actual city of Baltimore, not the metaphor of Baltimore, could desperately use some attention, so it's good news that it's finally getting some. If anything, Trump's tweets underplay the crisis there. Last year, the city of Baltimore recorded 309 homicides. That's a rate of more than 50 per 100,000 people. To put it in perspective, if Baltimore were a country, it would have the fourth highest murder rate in the world, barely below Venezuela. Or think of it this way. Last week, the left denounced President Trump for reaching a deal with Guatemala that declares the country a safe location for asylum seekers. Liberals told us that Guatemala has too much crime and too many gangs to be considered safe. Making people stay in Guatemala is a human rights violation, they told us. And yet, and here's the amazing part, Baltimore's murder rate is double that of Guatemala. In almost any way that a city can be a disaster, Baltimore is. More than 22% of the city lives in poverty. Almost 65% of all children in Baltimore grow up in single-parent households. The schools, not surprisingly, are a catastrophe. In 2017, 1/3 of Baltimore's high schools had 0 students who were proficient in math. Let that sink in. In 13 of Baltimore's 39 high schools, not a single student, not one student, was deemed proficient at math. You'd think that would be a national scandal. You'd think that Elijah Cummings would be in a hunger strike until that's fixed. Bernie Sanders, to his credit, by the way, visited Baltimore a few years ago and was shocked by it. Watch.
Anyone who took the walk that we took around this neighborhood would not think you're in a wealthy nation. You would think that you were in a third world country.
A third world country? Whoa, wait a second. Is Bernie Sanders a white supremacist? No. Actually, he's just an old-fashioned liberal. That's how Democrats used to think. If they saw misery and urban decay, they wanted to fix it. Not anymore. Modern progressives are different from that. Modern progressivism isn't about helping the people beneath you. It's about establishing moral superiority over them. From her taxpayer-funded vacation in Italy today, Nancy Pelosi defended Elijah Cummings and the city of Baltimore. And Pelosi would know she grew up in Baltimore. Her father was the mayor of Baltimore. Her brother was the mayor of Baltimore. But like most rich progressives, Pelosi herself is long gone. She's in San Francisco now, in Pacific Heights. She's got a winery in Napa. She's not interested in going back to Baltimore. It's easier just to give other people lectures about Baltimore. Most Democrats feel that way. They've given up on the poor. Instead of trying to fix Baltimore's problems and rescue its people, they've decided to import a new population of people, many of them illegal aliens. Baltimore City Councilman Zeke Cohen once bragged about it on this show. Watch. My only concern is for the people who are already here. Does it make a school better when people move in who don't speak English? Is it good for the kids who are already in the school, do you think? Does it improve the education? Is it fair to the taxpayers? Have you thought about that?
I think the greatest asset in our city is our diversity. And I was joined by an amazing group of immigrant youth yesterday in passing this resolution.
Hold on, slow down. That doesn't mean anything. I asked you a sincere question. Does it improve a school when a lot of people move in who don't speak English? Does the school get better?
Absolutely.
Yeah, schools get a lot better when you import a lot of people who don't speak English. Actually, it turns out the schools haven't gotten better at all. But Zeke Cohen doesn't care. Nobody on the left cares, because they don't care about Baltimore. Illegal immigration has been devastating for Baltimore, and a lot of cities like Baltimore. The last thing any poor, desperate community needs is even more poor, desperate people. It's not an attack on anybody. It's a fact. Go to Lewiston, Maine, if you don't believe it. Illegal immigration drives down wages for low-skilled workers nationwide. They suck up education and health care dollars. Democrats do not care about this. Why? Because illegal immigrants are reliable votes for them. They are a pathway to power. And for Democrats, that is worth sacrificing a city or two or 10 or a whole country.
The fact is the city does, as you pointed out, have by far the highest murder rate in the country. And while there's suffering places all over the United States, I really think that a very high murder rate, such as what Baltimore has, shows really a level of depravity and degradation that surpasses anything we can find anywhere else in the country.
Dr. Ben Carlson is the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, obviously, but before that, he lived in Baltimore. In fact, he spent almost 30 years performing pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, the most famous hospital in America, which is in Baltimore. He knows a lot about the city, and we're happy to have him join us tonight. Secretary Carlson, thank you very much for coming on. So you've spent a good chunk of your life in Baltimore. It's a sad city. I think it's a city with a lot of promise. What does it need, do you think?
Well, first of all, you know, as a pediatric neurosurgeon, I spent many hours, sometimes operating all night long, trying to give children of Baltimore and other places around the world a second chance at life. And usually we were successful, but a few days later I was in a horrible dilemma because some of those kids had to go back into homes in East Baltimore that were infested with rats and roaches and ticks and mold and lead and violence, and I didn't want to send them back. Sometimes I would even consider, you know, extra tests so they could stay in the hospital an extra day or two. But now, fortunately, God's given me an opportunity to do something about it. And that's one of the reasons I'm delighted to be in this administration. You know, while I was there, I worked on a lot of issues with many politicians, including Elijah Cummings, you know, particularly in terms of childhood education and improving the life of the people. I don't think Elijah Cummings is a bad person. I think he actually is working hard to try to help people. And I certainly don't think President Trump is a bad person. He's working very hard. And in fact, I asked him today, would you be willing to work with Elijah Cummings to bring some relief to the people of Baltimore? He said he would be happy to. But in the meantime, he's going to continue with the programs, you know, like the opportunity zones, which get people to take money and invest it into the areas that are distressed. There are 149 of them in Maryland. And you know, Governor Hogan is doing a good job of helping to capitalize upon that. But also, you know, unemployment is at a very low level. Manufacturing is coming back. Wages are going up. You know, prison reform. All of these things are happening. These are not things that a person who was a racist would do. And we allow ourselves to be distracted by these things. And I think what President Trump was trying to say is that rather than spending your time talking about, you know, our brave border agents and investigating endlessly things that you can't find anything on, why not spend some time working more for these people, you know, who are suffering, and that he's willing to work with them? I think that's what we should be asking for.
I wonder if a city in which 65% of all kids are growing up in a single-parent household, I wonder if you can get anywhere without addressing that.
You need to address that. You need to address the family issues. You know, there was a poverty study by the Brookings Institute, and it concluded after a massive study that there were 3 things a person could do to reduce the likelihood of poverty to 2% or less. Number 1, finish high school. Number 2, get married. Number 3, wait until you're married to have children. But a lot of our policies over these decades have not reflected that, and in fact have moved us in the opposite direction. We should actually utilize the data. It would make a huge difference.